The sky had been bruised purple for 3 days when the first raindrops began to fall on Apache Junction, Arizona. And by the time Natalie Parker realized she was in trouble, the water was already knee-deep and rising fast. It was April of 1883, and the spring storms had come later than usual that year, lulling everyone into a false sense of security. Natalie had been living in Apache Junction for 6 months, ever since her father died of pneumonia back in Boston and left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished family name. Her Aunt Margaret had written to her, offering a position helping at the general store she ran with her husband in the Arizona Territory. Natalie had accepted without hesitation, desperate for a fresh start somewhere nobody knew about her father's gambling problems or the creditors who had stripped their home bare. The general store sat on the eastern edge of town, close to where Superstition Mountain loomed in the distance like a silent guardian. When the rain started that morning, Natalie had been alone in the store, restocking shelves with canned goods that had arrived on the previous week's supply wagon. Her aunt and uncle had gone to visit a neighboring ranch to discuss a business arrangement, promising to return before nightfall. But the rain came faster than anyone expected. What started as a gentle patter quickly became a roar, sheets of water cascading from the sky as if someone had torn open the heavens. Natalie watched through the store window as the main street transformed into a river, the dust that had plagued the town for months turning to mud, and then disappearing entirely beneath rushing brown water. She had lived her entire life in Boston, where rain was a frequent companion, but she had never seen anything like this. The water seemed to have a life of its own, growing angrier by the minute, swirling debris down the street like it weighed nothing. When the water started seeping under the door of the store, Natalie tried to barricade it with flour sacks, but the flood was relentless. The water rose to her ankles, then her shins, and she knew she had to get to higher ground. She waded toward the stairs that led to the storage loft above the main floor, her skirts heavy and dragging in the muddy water. That was when she heard the cracking sound, like thunder but more immediate, more terrible. She looked up just in time to see a support beam give way near the back of the building. The entire structure shuddered. Natalie grabbed onto the stair railing, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the roar of the rain. The water was rising faster now, and she realized with cold horror that climbing to the loft might trap her if the building collapsed. But staying on the ground floor meant drowning. She was still frozen in indecision when the front door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by the force of the flood. Water surged into the store with violent purpose, knocking Natalie off her feet. She went under, her mouth filling with muddy water, her hands grasping at nothing. She surfaced, gasping, and tried to grab onto a shelf, but it toppled over, merchandise floating around her like strange fish. The current pulled her toward the gaping hole where the door had been, and she knew if she went through it, she would be swept away into the main torrent. She screamed, knowing no one could hear her over the storm, knowing she was going to die in this God-forsaken town in a territory she barely understood, so far from everything she had ever known. Then a hand grabbed her wrist. The grip was iron-strong, unyielding, and she looked up to see a man braced in what remained of the doorway, water rushing around his legs. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his head and intense blue eyes that locked onto hers with absolute focus. "I have got you," he shouted over the roar. "Hold on to me." Natalie reached up with her other hand and he caught it, pulling her against the current. She could feel the strength in him, the way he set himself against the flood like he was carved from the same stone as the mountains. He pulled her close, then lifted her, actually lifted her clear out of the water, holding her high against his chest. "Put your arms around my neck," he commanded, and she obeyed without thinking, locking her hands together behind his head. He shifted his grip, one arm under her knees, the other around her back, holding her well above the waterline even as it surged past his waist. "I will not let go," he said, and something in his voice made her believe him absolutely. "I promise you, I will not let go." He started moving, each step deliberate and careful, fighting against water that would have swept a smaller man away. Natalie pressed her face against his shoulder, feeling the solidity of him, the warmth of him despite the cold rain that continued to hammer down. She could feel his muscles working with each step, could hear his breathing, steady and controlled despite the effort. The water was chest deep on him now, and still rising. Natalie looked back at the general store just in time to see the rest of the roof cave in with a groan of splitting timber. If she had made it to the loft, she would be dead. "Where are we going?" she asked, her lips close to his ear so he could hear her. "There is a rock formation about 200 yards north," he said, his voice strained but steady. "High ground. We can wait out the worst of it there." 200 yards might as well have been 200 miles. The current was vicious, pulling at them, trying to tear her from his grasp. Debris swept past, pieces of buildings, barrels, even a chicken coop with several terrified birds clinging to it. The cowboy adjusted his grip on her, holding her higher, and she felt his arms trembling with the effort. "You can put me down," she said. "I can walk. You will tire yourself out." "Not a chance," he said. "Current would take you in a heartbeat. Just hold on tight." So she did, wrapping her arms more securely around his neck, pressing herself against him. She could feel his heart beating against her side, strong and fast. She did not even know his name, this man who had crashed into a flooding building to save her, who was now carrying her through water that could kill them both. Every step was a battle. The water pushed and pulled, swirling with chaotic energy. The cowboy slipped once, and Natalie felt her stomach drop as they both tilted, but he caught himself, his boots finding purchase on something solid beneath the murky surface. He kept moving forward, relentless, determined. The rain showed no sign of stopping. It came down in sheets so thick that Natalie could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that rumbled through the valley like artillery fire. In the flashes of light, she could see the devastation around them. Buildings collapsing, entire structures simply washing away. Apache Junction was being destroyed before their eyes. "Almost there," the cowboy said, and she heard the exhaustion creeping into his voice now. She looked ahead and saw what he was aiming for, a tumble of large boulders rising from the flood like an island. The water swirled around them but did not cover them, and the highest point was a good 15 feet above the current waterline. The last 50 yards were the worst. The current seemed to sense they were close to safety and fought harder to claim them. The cowboy pushed forward, his jaw clenched, every muscle in his body straining. Natalie felt guilty for her weight, for being a burden, but she knew he was right. If he put her down, she would be swept away instantly. Then his boots hit rock, solid rock, and he was climbing, still holding her, using his legs to push them up and out of the water. They reached a flat area about halfway up the formation, sheltered by an overhang that provided some protection from the rain. Only then did he finally set her down, gently, his hands steadying her until he was sure she could stand on her own. Natalie's legs nearly gave out. She was shaking all over, from cold and shock and the adrenaline that was only now starting to fade. The cowboy caught her elbow, guiding her to sit on a relatively smooth boulder under the overhang. Then he collapsed next to her, breathing hard, water streaming from his clothes and hair. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, listening to the rain, watching the flood continue its rampage through the town below. In the distance, Natalie could hear people shouting, animals crying out, the ongoing destruction of everything she had started to think of as home. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice rough. "You saved my life. I do not even know your name." He turned to look at her, and she got her first real look at him now that they were relatively safe. He was probably in his late 20s, with strong features that had been weathered by sun and wind. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, faded with time, and his blue eyes held a depth that suggested he had seen more than his fair share of hardship. Despite his exhaustion, there was a gentleness in the way he looked at her. "Nathan Prescott," he said. "I work as a ranch hand at the Double R about 5 miles west of town." "Natalie Parker," she replied. "I work at the general store, or I did. I think it is gone now." Nathan looked out at where the store had been. From this vantage point, they could see the collapsed pile of timber that was all that remained. "I am sorry," he said, "but buildings can be rebuilt. People cannot be brought back." "My aunt and uncle," Natalie said suddenly, fear spiking through her. "They were visiting the Henderson ranch." "Do you think they are safe?" "The Henderson place is on high ground," Nathan said. "They should be fine. Probably worried sick about you, though, once they see what happened to the town." Natalie nodded, trying to take comfort in that. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her in a way that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances, but she was too cold and too shocked to care about propriety. Nathan noticed her shivering. He peeled off his leather vest, which had provided some protection from the water, and draped it over her shoulders. It was still damp but warmer than nothing. "You will get cold," she protested. "I will be fine," he said. "I have been through worse." She looked at him, curiosity breaking through her fear. "What were you doing in town during the storm?" "I had come in to pick up some supplies for the ranch," he said. "I was in the saloon when the flood started. The bartender and I got everyone out, made sure people were heading to high ground. I was checking buildings when I saw you through the store window." He paused. "I saw the door give way and you go under. I did not think. I just moved." "You could have died," Natalie said, the reality of it hitting her. "The building collapsed right after we got out." "But we did get out," Nathan said simply. "That is what matters." They fell silent again. The rain continued, though it seemed to be lessening slightly, the drops not quite as heavy as before. The flood still raged through the town, but the water level appeared to have stopped rising. Natalie did not know if that meant the worst was over or if it was just a temporary respite. "Where are you from originally?" Nathan asked, clearly trying to distract her from the disaster unfolding below. "You have an accent." "East Coast, Boston," Natalie said. "I came here 6 months ago to live with my aunt and uncle after my father passed away. This is my first real experience of the West. I am beginning to think it wants to kill me." Nathan smiled slightly at that. "The West can be hard," he admitted, "but it is also beautiful. Once this storm passes, once we rebuild, you will see. There is nowhere else like it." "You sound like you love it here," she said. "I do," he said. "I grew up in Texas, moved around quite a bit doing ranch work, but Arizona feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. The mountains, the desert, the sky that goes on forever. It gets in your blood." Natalie studied him as he spoke, seeing the passion in his eyes despite his exhaustion. There was something solid about Nathan Prescott, something reliable. He was a man who kept his promises, she thought. When he said he would not let go, he meant it with every fiber of his being. "How long have you been at the Double R?" she asked. "About 2 years," he said. "The owner, Robert Richmond, took a chance on me when I drifted into town. I was pretty rough around the edges back then." He gave me work, taught me things about ranching I had never learned growing up. I owe him a lot." "He must think highly of you," Natalie said. "Otherwise he would not have kept you on for 2 years." Nathan shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "I work hard, that is all. I try to be someone people can depend on." "You are," Natalie said softly. "You are definitely that." He met her eyes and something passed between them, something warm and unspoken. Natalie felt her breath catch. She had never believed in those romantic notions from the novels she used to read, about two people meeting and feeling an instant connection. But sitting here on this rock, surrounded by devastation, wearing this cowboy's vest and remembering the feeling of his arms holding her safe, she wondered if maybe those notions were not so foolish after all. The storm raged on through the afternoon, though the worst of the rain eventually passed. Nathan and Natalie stayed on their rocky refuge, talking in fits and starts, sometimes falling into comfortable silence. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother who died when he was young and his father who drank himself to death a few years later. She told him about Boston, about her father's decline, about feeling like she did not belong anywhere. "You belong here," Nathan said at one point, with such certainty that Natalie almost believed him. As evening approached, the water finally began to recede. It happened slowly at first, then faster, draining away as if the earth itself had opened up to swallow it. The devastation it left behind was staggering. Buildings were gone, others stood at odd angles, and mud covered everything. Bodies of livestock floated past, and Natalie turned away, not wanting to think about whether any people had been caught in the flood. "We should head back," Nathan said. "See who needs help. Find your aunt and uncle." They climbed down from the rocks carefully, their legs stiff from sitting for so long. The ground was treacherous, covered in mud and debris. Nathan took Natalie's hand, helping her navigate the worst spots, and she held on gratefully. They made their way back toward the center of town, joining other survivors who were emerging from various refuges. People called out to each other, searching for loved ones, assessing the damage. The saloon still stood, as did the sheriff's office and a handful of other buildings. But easily half of Apache Junction had been destroyed or badly damaged. Natalie heard someone calling her name and turned to see her Aunt Margaret running toward her, her Uncle William close behind. Margaret grabbed Natalie in a fierce hug, sobbing with relief. "Thank God," Margaret kept saying. "Thank God you are alive. We saw the store. We thought you were inside when it collapsed." "I almost was," Natalie said, pulling back to look at her aunt. "This man, Nathan Prescott, he pulled me out. He carried me to high ground. He saved my life." Margaret turned to Nathan, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you so much. We owe you everything." Nathan looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same," he said. "No," William said firmly, shaking Nathan's hand with both of his own. "Not everyone would have risked their life the way you did. You are a hero, son. We will never forget what you did for our niece." Other people were gathering around now, and Nathan was looking increasingly like he wanted to escape. Natalie recognized the feeling. She was overwhelmed too, the events of the day crashing down on her now that the immediate danger had passed. "I should get back to the ranch," Nathan said. "Let them know I am all right. They will be worried." "Of course," William said, "but you must come back tomorrow. Let us thank you properly. Let us help you in any way we can." Nathan nodded, though Natalie could tell he did not want any fuss. His eyes found hers across the small crowd that had gathered. "Take care of yourself, Miss Parker," he said. "You too, Mr. Prescott," she replied. "And thank you for everything." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture so classically Western it made her want to smile despite everything. Then he was walking away, his boots squelching in the mud, heading toward where the road west would eventually lead to the Double R Ranch. Natalie watched him go until he disappeared into the gathering dusk. She touched the leather vest still draped over her shoulders, realizing she was still wearing it. She should have given it back to him, but she was glad she had not. It felt like a promise, a reason for them to see each other again. The next few days were a blur of activity. The entire town came together to deal with the aftermath of the flood. Bodies were found and identified, funerals were held, and the massive task of cleaning up and rebuilding began. Natalie worked alongside her aunt and uncle, salvaging what they could from the destroyed general store and making plans to rebuild. Nathan did not come back to town the next day, or the day after that. Natalie told herself he was busy at the ranch, that the flood had probably caused damage there too. She told herself it did not matter, that he had saved her life and she was grateful, but that was all it was. But she kept his vest, and she kept thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way his voice had sounded when he promised not to let go. It was almost a week after the flood when Natalie was helping sort through donated supplies at the church when someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned, and there was Nathan, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way he had not looked even while carrying her through a raging flood. "Mr. Prescott," she said, and she could not keep the smile from her face. "I am so glad to see you. I still have your vest." "I should have returned it sooner, but things have been so chaotic." "That is not why I came," Nathan said quickly. Then he paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Well, I mean, I am glad to get the vest back, but that is not the main reason." Natalie waited, her heart beating faster. "I have been thinking about you," Nathan said. "A lot. More than I probably should. And I know we only met that one day and it was under terrible circumstances, but I was wondering if maybe I could take you to dinner. Or lunch. Or just talk. If you wanted to." Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Nathan's face broke into a relieved smile. "Really, really," she confirmed. "The saloon is serving meals again. We could go there if you are free now." "I am free," Nathan said immediately. "I told the boss I might be in town all day. He told me to take whatever time I needed." They walked to the saloon together, and Natalie was intensely aware of him beside her, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers. People they passed nodded greetings, and she saw more than a few knowing looks. In a small town like Apache Junction, nothing stayed secret for long, and the story of the cowboy who carried a young woman through the flood had already become something of a legend. The saloon was crowded with people, many of whom had lost their homes and were living temporarily in any building still standing. But the owner, a grizzled man named Jack Murphy, found them a small table in the corner and brought them plates of beef stew and cornbread without them even having to ask. "On the house," he said gruffly, "for the hero and the lady he saved." Nathan protested, but Jack waved him off and disappeared back behind the bar. Nathan shook his head, looking embarrassed. "Everyone keeps calling me a hero," he said. "I am not. I just did what needed doing." "That is exactly what makes you a hero," Natalie said. "The fact that you do not see it that way." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of them hungry. Then Nathan set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. "Tell me about Boston," he said. "What was your life like there?" So Natalie told him. She told him about growing up in a comfortable brownstone, about the society parties her mother used to host before she died of influenza when Natalie was 15. She told him about her father, who had been a respected banker before he developed a gambling problem that destroyed everything. She told him about the shame of having creditors come to the house, about selling her mother's jewelry to pay debts, about the relief and fear she felt when her aunt's letter arrived offering her a new start. "I felt like such a coward, running away," she admitted. But I could not stay there. Everywhere I went, people whispered. I was the daughter of that Parker man, the one who stole from his own bank. Did he steal? Nathan asked. No, Natalie said firmly. He borrowed against funds he should not have touched, trying to win back what he had lost. But he fully intended to pay it back. He just died before he could. Then you have nothing to be ashamed of, Nathan said. You are not responsible for your father's mistakes, and coming here was not cowardice. It takes courage to start over somewhere completely new. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that, how much the guilt had been weighing on her. What about you? She asked, wanting to turn the conversation away from her own troubles. You said your father drank himself to death. That must have been hard. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. It was, he finally said. He was a good man when he was sober, but after my mother died, he just gave up. I tried to help him, tried to keep him from drinking, but you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. How old were you when he died? 19, Nathan said. Old enough to be on my own, but it was still hard. I drifted for a while after that, working whatever ranch jobs I could find, never staying in one place long. I think I was running too in my own way. And now, Natalie asked softly, are you still running? Nathan met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. No, he said. I think I finally found a reason to stay put. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Natalie knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, but it was hard to be careful when he looked at her like that, like she was something precious. Mr. Prescott, she started. Nathan, he interrupted. Please call me Nathan. Nathan, she said, liking the feel of his name on her tongue. I should probably tell you that I am not very experienced with courting. I had a few suitors back in Boston, but nothing serious, and I have no idea how these things work out here. They work the same way they do anywhere, I imagine, Nathan said with a slight smile. Two people spend time together. They get to know each other. If they like what they find, they keep spending time together. That sounds manageable, Natalie said, smiling back. There is one difference out here, though, Nathan added. Things tend to move faster. Life is harder in the West, less certain. People do not always have the luxury of long courtships. Are you saying you are going to ask me to marry you after 2 conversations? Natalie teased, though her heart was racing. No, Nathan said seriously. I am saying that when I know something is right, I do not see the point in pretending otherwise. And this, sitting here with you, talking like this, it feels right. Natalie could not argue with that. Despite barely knowing him, despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting, she felt more comfortable with Nathan than she had with anyone in a long time. There was an honesty about him, a straightforwardness that she found refreshing after the social games she had grown up with in Boston. They talked for hours, until the sun was setting and Jack Murphy started lighting lamps around the saloon. Nathan told her about his work at the Double R, about the horses he trained, about his dream of someday having his own small ranch. Natalie told him about her love of reading, about how she had always wanted to travel but never had the chance, about her fear that she would never truly fit in out west. You will fit in, Nathan assured her. You are stronger than you think. You survived that flood. You survived losing everything back east and starting over. You can survive anything. When they finally left the saloon, Nathan walked her back to the boarding house where she was staying temporarily with her aunt and uncle. The night was cool, the sky brilliantly clear after the storm, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. Can I see you again? Nathan asked as they stood outside the boarding house. I would be disappointed if you did not want to, Natalie said. Tomorrow, he suggested. I have to work, but I could come by in the evening. Maybe we could take a walk. That sounds perfect, Natalie agreed. Nathan hesitated, then reached out and gently touched her cheek, his hand warm and slightly rough. I am really glad you are all right, he said quietly. When I think about what could have happened if I had been 5 minutes later. But you were not, Natalie said, covering his hand with hers. You were exactly on time. He smiled at that, then reluctantly stepped back. Good night, Natalie. Good night, Nathan. She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside, her cheek still tingling where he had touched her. True to his word, Nathan came back the next evening and the evening after that, and the one after that. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Nathan would work at the ranch during the day, then ride into town to spend time with Natalie in the evenings. Sometimes they would walk through what was left of Apache Junction, watching as the town slowly rebuilt itself. Sometimes they would sit outside the church and talk. Sometimes they would have dinner at the saloon, though Jack Murphy had stopped letting them pay after the third time. Natalie's aunt and uncle approved wholeheartedly of the courtship. William said Nathan was the kind of man who could be counted on, and Margaret said she had never seen Natalie look so happy. The rest of the town seemed equally pleased, treating the romance as a bright spot in the aftermath of the disaster. One evening, about a month after the flood, Nathan took Natalie out to see the Double R Ranch. They rode together on his horse, Natalie seated in front of him, his arms around her holding the reins. She leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and content in a way she had never experienced before. The ranch was beautiful, sprawling across a valley with the mountains rising dramatically in the background. There were several buildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, and a main house where the owner lived with his wife. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Natalie could see horses in a nearby corral. This is amazing, Natalie said as Nathan helped her down from the horse. Wait until you see the sunset from here, Nathan said. It is something special. He introduced her to Robert Richmond, the ranch owner, who was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Robert's wife, Dorothy, insisted they stay for dinner, and Natalie found herself sitting around a large wooden table with Nathan, the Richmonds, and several other ranch hands. The conversation was easy and full of laughter. The men teased Nathan good-naturedly about finally finding himself a girl, and Nathan took it all with good humor. Dorothy pulled Natalie aside after dinner, showing her the garden she was cultivating behind the house. Nathan is a good man, Dorothy said as they walked between rows of vegetables. One of the best we have ever had working here. He is loyal, hardworking, and honest. Those are rare qualities. I am learning that, Natalie said. He has never brought a woman out here before, Dorothy continued. In the 2 years he has worked for us, he has never even mentioned a woman. So the fact that he brought you means something. It means you are important to him. Natalie felt her cheeks warm. He is important to me too, she admitted. Dorothy smiled. I thought so. I can see it in the way you look at each other. That is how Robert and I looked at each other 30 years ago, and we still do. She paused, then added, if things work out the way I think they will, you should know that you would always be welcome here. We treat our ranch hands like family, and their families become our family too. The warmth in Dorothy's words made Natalie feel like she might actually be building a home here, a real home, for the first time since her mother died. As promised, Nathan showed her the sunset. They stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching as the sky transformed into breathtaking shades of orange, pink, and gold. The mountains turned purple in the fading light, and the entire landscape seemed to glow. You were right, Natalie said softly, not wanting to break the spell of the moment. It is something special. Nathan was not looking at the sunset, he was looking at her. Yes, he said, It is. Natalie turned to him, and before she could think about whether it was proper or too soon or what the rules were supposed to be, he was kissing her. His lips were gentle but sure, one hand cupping her face while the other rested on her waist. She kissed him back, feeling like every moment of her life had been leading to him, to this vast and beautiful place that was beginning to feel like home. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it is fast and maybe I should wait to say it, but I have never been good at pretending. I am falling in love with you, Natalie Parker, and I wanted you to know." Natalie's heart felt like it might burst. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think this was possible. I did not think I could feel this way about someone I have only known for a month. But I do." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Natalie let herself sink into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found where she was meant to be. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts, content just to be close to each other. When they reached the boarding house, Nathan helped her down from the horse and held her hands in his. "I want to talk to your uncle," he said. "Properly. Ask his permission to court you officially, with the intention of marriage." "We are already courting," Natalie pointed out, though her heart was soaring. "I know," Nathan said, "but I want to do this right. I want him to know I am serious about you. I want everyone to know." "All right," Natalie agreed. "But you should know he already approves. He told me so last week." Nathan grinned. "Well, I am still going to ask him, tomorrow. And then I am going to start saving every penny I earn because I want to buy a piece of land. Nothing big, just enough for a small ranch, somewhere we can build a home together." "We do not need much," Natalie said. "Just us." "That is enough." "You deserve more than enough," Nathan said firmly. "You deserve everything." He kissed her goodnight, soft and sweet, then waited until she was safely inside before mounting his horse and riding away. Natalie floated up to the room she shared with her aunt, feeling like she was living in a dream. Margaret was already in bed, but she sat up when Natalie entered, eyes bright with curiosity. "Well," she asked. "How was the ranch?" "Beautiful," Natalie said. "And Margaret, he said he is falling in love with me." Her aunt's face broke into a delighted smile. "And what did you say?" "That I am falling in love with him too," Natalie admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Is it crazy? Is it too fast?" "Love does not follow a schedule," Margaret said wisely. "When I met your uncle, I knew within a week that I would marry him. We were engaged within a month and married 3 months later. That was 23 years ago, and I have never regretted it for a single day. But what if I am wrong?" Natalie asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking in the back of her mind. "What if I am just grateful to him for saving my life and I am confusing that with love? Do you think about him constantly when you are apart?" Margaret asked. "Yes," Natalie admitted. "Do you feel more like yourself when you are with him than you do any other time?" "Yes." "Does the thought of a future without him feel wrong, incomplete?" Natalie swallowed hard. "Yes." "Then it is love," Margaret said simply. "Gratitude fades, love grows. Trust what you feel, Natalie." "You have good instincts." Natalie nodded, feeling more certain. She did love Nathan. It was fast and unexpected and probably reckless, but it was real. Nathan spoke to William the next day, and as predicted, William gave his blessing enthusiastically. That evening, Nathan presented Natalie with a simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother. "It is not fancy," he said, holding it out to her. "But my father gave it to my mother when they got engaged, and it was the one thing of hers I kept after she died. I would be honored if you would wear it." Natalie's eyes filled with tears as she held out her hand, letting him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Yes," she said. "Yes to everything. Yes to courting, yes to marriage, yes to building a life together. Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Natalie felt like all the broken pieces of her life were finally coming together into something beautiful. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. The general store was rebuilt, better than before, and Natalie threw herself into helping her aunt and uncle run it. Nathan continued working at the Double R, but every penny he earned went into savings. He was determined to buy that piece of land, to give Natalie the home he thought she deserved. They talked about everything, planning their future down to the smallest detail. They would have a small ranch, just enough cattle to make a living, maybe some horses that Nathan could train and sell. They would have a simple house with a big kitchen because Natalie loved to cook, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. And someday, when they were ready, they would have children. How many? Nathan asked one evening as they sat outside the church, his arm around her shoulders. At least 3, Natalie said. I was an only child and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings. 3 sounds perfect, Nathan agreed. 2 boys and a girl. Or 2 girls and a boy, Natalie countered. We do not get to choose. As long as they are healthy and have your smile, I will be happy, Nathan said, kissing her temple. It was in late August, 4 months after the flood, that Nathan came to town with news. His face was bright with excitement as he found Natalie in the general store. I found it, he said without preamble. The perfect piece of land, 20 acres, 5 miles north of town with a creek running through it and good grazing. The owner is willing to sell for a price I can almost afford. Almost? Natalie asked. I am about $200 short, Nathan admitted. But the owner says he will hold it for me for 2 months. If I can come up with the money by then, it is ours. Natalie's mind was already racing. $200 was a lot of money, but it was not impossible. I have some savings, she said. About $50, and maybe my aunt and uncle would be willing to loan us the rest. I cannot take your savings, Nathan protested. You worked hard for that. We are engaged, Natalie said firmly. What is mine is yours. We are building this life together, remember. Nathan pulled her into a hug, right there in the middle of the store, not caring who might see. What did I do to deserve you? He murmured into her hair. You kept your promise, Natalie said simply. You did not let go. With Natalie's savings and a loan from William and Margaret, Nathan was able to buy the land 2 weeks later. They rode out to see it together, and Natalie fell in love with it immediately. The creek Nathan had mentioned was more like a small river, clear and cold with water that came down from the mountains. The land itself was gently rolling, with good grass and scattered trees. In the distance, she could see the mountains that Nathan loved so much, standing watch over their future home. We should get married soon, Nathan said as they stood by the creek, holding hands. I do not want to wait anymore. I want to start building our house, building our life. How soon? Natalie asked, though she felt the same urgency. Next month, Nathan suggested. That would give us time to plan a small wedding and then we can start building before winter comes. Natalie thought about all the reasons they should wait. She had only known Nathan for 5 months. They had not even known each other a full year. But when she looked at him, at the love and certainty in his eyes, all those reasons seemed meaningless. Next month, she agreed. September. They were married on a clear, bright Saturday in mid-September. The ceremony was held at the church, with most of Apache Junction in attendance. Natalie wore a simple white dress that her aunt had helped her sew, and Nathan wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing. Robert and Dorothy Richmond stood up as witnesses, along with Natalie's aunt and uncle. The ceremony was performed by a traveling preacher who made his rounds through the smaller towns in the territory. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Natalie with such joy and tenderness that several people in the congregation wiped away tears. The reception was held at the saloon, which Jack Murphy had closed to the public for the day and decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was music and dancing and more food than should have been possible given how recently the town had been devastated by the flood. But people had come together, everyone contributing something, wanting to celebrate this union that had come out of tragedy. Natalie danced with Nathan, with her uncle, with Robert Richmond, with several other men from town. But her eyes kept returning to her husband. Her husband. The word felt strange and wonderful in her mind. As the sun began to set, Nathan took her hand and led her outside. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the Double R Ranch, in a small cabin that Robert had offered them. In a few weeks, once they had built a basic structure on their own land, they would move there permanently. They rode to the ranch together, Natalie once again seated in front of Nathan on his horse, her white dress billowing around them. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. The cabin was small but clean, with a comfortable bed covered in a quilt that Dorothy had made especially for them. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the table and wood stacked by the fireplace. Nathan started a fire while Natalie stood by the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Are you nervous?" Nathan asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "A little," Natalie admitted, "but not because I have any doubts, just because this is all so new." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. "We do not have to rush anything," he said. "We have the rest of our lives." "I know," Natalie said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "But I do not want to wait any more. I love you, Nathan Prescott. I want to be your wife in every way." What happened next was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Nathan was patient and careful, making sure Natalie felt safe and loved every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking softly about their plans and dreams until they both drifted off to sleep. The next months were some of the hardest and happiest of Natalie's life. Building a house from scratch was exhausting work, even with Nathan doing the bulk of the heavy labor. Natalie helped where she could, and on weekends, friends from town would come out to lend a hand. Robert Richmond donated timber from the ranch's land, and William provided materials at cost from the general store. By November, they had a small but solid cabin with 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a porch. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, built with their own hands on their own land. The day they moved in, Natalie cried happy tears as Nathan carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Prescott," he said, kissing her soundly. "Home," Natalie repeated, loving the sound of it. They spent their first winter together learning how to run a ranch, how to work as a team, how to be married. There were challenges, certainly. Money was tight and the work was relentless. But there were also quiet evenings by the fire, Sunday mornings spent in bed, and the deep contentment that came from building something meaningful together. In early spring, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be sure before telling Nathan. When she finally did, on a warm March evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, he was speechless with joy. "Truly," he kept asking. "We are going to have a baby, truly," Natalie confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Sometime in October, the doctor thinks." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her so carefully like she might break. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Nathan said. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I did not think life could be this good." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Natalie was exhausted and often sick in the early months. Nathan was attentive and worried, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He took over most of the heavy ranch work, insisting she rest more. Margaret came out to visit regularly, bringing food and advice and the kind of motherly comfort that Natalie had missed for so long. As Natalie's belly grew, Nathan would talk to their unborn child, telling stories and singing soft songs. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving designs into the wood with painstaking care. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for the new life they had created. Their daughter was born on a cool October evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the sky in brilliant colors. The birth was long and difficult, with Dorothy Richmond and the town doctor in attendance. Nathan waited on the porch, pacing and praying until he finally heard the cry of a newborn. Dorothy came out smiling. "You have a daughter," she said, "and your wife is fine. Tired, but fine." Nathan rushed inside to find Natalie propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. He approached slowly, reverently, and Natalie pulled back the blanket so he could see their daughter's face. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced with a shock of dark hair. Her eyes were closed, but as Nathan reached out to touch her cheek, they fluttered open, unfocused but somehow seeming to look right at him. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your father." The baby made a small sound, and Nathan looked at Natalie with wonder in his eyes. "She is beautiful," he said, "just like her mother." "What should we name her?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Nathan thought for a moment. "Grace," he said, "because she is a gift of grace. Because despite everything we have been through, we have been blessed beyond measure." "Grace Prescott," Natalie said, testing the name. "I love it." Nathan carefully sat on the edge of the bed, and Natalie placed their daughter in his arms. He held her with such tenderness, such love, that Natalie felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I promise you," Nathan said to the baby, "I will always protect you. I will always keep you safe. I will never let go." Natalie's breath caught at the words. They were the same words he had said to her that terrible day in the flood, when he had carried her through the rising water. Words that had proven true every day since. "I love you," she said to Nathan, reaching out to touch his face. "I love you so much." He leaned over carefully, mindful of the baby in his arms, and kissed her. "I love you too, both of you, my whole world." The years that followed were full and rich. Grace grew into a bright, spirited child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. When she was 2, Natalie gave birth to a son they named Thomas, and 2 years after that, another daughter they called Emma. The house they had built was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Nathan proved to have a gift for training horses, and word spread. People came from neighboring territories to buy horses trained by Nathan Prescott. The income allowed them to buy more land, more cattle, to build a proper barn and expand their house further. Natalie threw herself into being a ranch wife and mother, but she also maintained her own interests. She started a small lending library out of their home, sharing her beloved books with neighboring families. She taught the children to read before they were old enough for school, instilling in them her love of stories and learning. Life was not always easy. There were years when the drought came and they struggled to keep their cattle alive. There were injuries and illnesses, moments of fear and doubt. But through it all, Nathan and Natalie faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Nathan took Natalie back to the rock formation where he had carried her during the flood. It was the first time either of them had been back since that terrible day. The rocks looked different in the sunlight, less ominous, just another part of the beautiful landscape they called home. "You remember that day?" Nathan asked, holding her hand as they stood on the flat area where they had waited out the worst of the storm. "Every detail," Natalie said. "I remember being terrified. I remember the water rising. And I remember you crashing through that door like some kind of avenging angel." "I was terrified too," Nathan admitted. "When I saw you go under, I thought I was too late. The fear I felt in that moment, I have never felt anything like it since." "But you were not too late," Natalie said. "You were exactly on time." Nathan pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "I knew in that moment," he said. "When I was carrying you through the flood, fighting the current, I knew you were going to be important to me. I did not understand it yet, did not know it was love, but I knew I would do anything to keep you safe." "You kept your promise," Natalie said softly. "You did not let go, you never have, not once in 10 years. And I never will," Nathan promised. "Not in 10 more years, not in 50. You are stuck with me, Natalie Prescott." "Good," Natalie said, kissing him, "because I am not planning on going anywhere." They stood there for a while, looking out at the view. Apache Junction was visible in the distance, rebuilt and thriving. Their own ranch was just a few miles away, probably with their 3 children running wild and Margaret visiting to keep an eye on them for the afternoon. "We have built a good life," Nathan said. "Better than I ever thought possible for someone like me." "For someone like you," Natalie repeated, pulling back to look at him. "Nathan, you are the best man I know. You work harder than anyone, you love fiercely, and you have never once made me regret trusting you with my heart and my future." "I just want to make sure you are happy," Nathan said. "That you do not regret giving up your life in Boston for this." "Boston was never my life," Natalie said firmly. "This is my life. You, our children, the ranch, this community. I have never been happier than I am right here, right now with you." Nathan smiled, that slow, warm smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Then I guess I did something right after all." "You did everything right," Natalie assured him. They rode home together as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had learned to love. When they arrived at their ranch, they could hear their children's laughter before they even reached the house. Grace was chasing Thomas around the yard while Emma toddled after them, trying to keep up. Margaret sat on the porch, keeping watch, and she waved when she saw them approaching. "Mama, Papa," Grace called, running over to them. At 8 years old, she was all long limbs and wild energy. Aunt Margaret made cookies, and Thomas ate 4 of them even though he was not supposed to. "Did not," Thomas protested, but his guilty expression gave him away. Nathan scooped up Emma, who had reached them and was holding up her arms demanding attention. "How is my littlest girl?" he asked, tickling her until she giggled. Natalie gathered Grace and Thomas into a hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood that clung to them. This, she thought. This was what she had been saved for, carried through the flood for. Not just to survive, but to live, to love, to build something meaningful and lasting. That night, after the children were in bed and Margaret had returned to town, Nathan and Natalie sat on their porch as they did most evenings. Nathan had his arm around her and she leaned against his shoulder, completely content. "Tell me a story," Natalie said, a request she made often. Nathan was a natural storyteller, able to weave tales that kept their children spellbound. "What kind of story?" Nathan asked. "A true one," Natalie said. "Tell me the story of us." Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he began. "Once upon a time, there was a cowboy who worked hard every day but felt like something was missing from his life. He did not know what it was, only that there was an emptiness inside him that nothing seemed to fill." Natalie smiled, knowing where this was going. Then one day, a terrible flood came, Nathan continued. The worst storm anyone had seen in years. And in the middle of the destruction, the cowboy saw a woman in danger. He did not think, he just acted, plunging into the rising water to save her. That sounds like a brave cowboy, Natalie murmured. Or a foolish one, Nathan said. But as he carried her through the flood, holding her high and promising not to let go, he felt that emptiness inside him start to fade. He did not understand it then, but he would later. He was holding his future in his arms. He was carrying the woman who would teach him what it meant to truly love someone, who would give him children and a home and a purpose beyond just surviving each day. What happened to them? Natalie asked, even though she knew. They fell in love, Nathan said simply. Fast and hard and forever. They built a life together, a family, a legacy. And every single day the cowboy woke up grateful that he had been in the right place at the right time, that he had not hesitated, that he had kept his promise and never let go. That is a good story, Natalie said, wiping away happy tears. The best one I know, Nathan agreed, because it is ours. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Arizona sky. In the distance, a coyote howled, and somewhere closer, an owl called out. These were the sounds of their life now, so different from the city noise Natalie had grown up with, but infinitely more precious. Nathan, Natalie said softly. Yes, thank you for saving me that day, for carrying me through the flood, for keeping your promise. Nathan turned to her, his hand cupping her cheek. Thank you for letting me, he said, for trusting me, for building this life with me. I would not want to build it with anyone else, Natalie said, and kissed him, there under the stars in front of the home they had made together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's skill with horses. She eventually married a young rancher from a neighboring property, a kind man who reminded Nathan of himself at that age. Thomas became a skilled carpenter, helping to build homes and barns throughout the territory. And Emma, the baby who had been born of such love, proved to have a gift for music, bringing joy wherever she went with her singing. Nathan and Natalie watched their children grow and build their own lives with pride and sometimes bittersweet sadness at how quickly time passed. But they also reveled in becoming grandparents, in seeing their legacy continue into another generation. On their 25th anniversary, their children surprised them with a celebration at the ranch. Friends came from all over the territory, many of them people who had been there that terrible day of the flood, who remembered the story of the cowboy who had carried a young woman through the rising water. Jack Murphy, now retired from running the saloon, stood up to give a toast. I have known Nathan Prescott for more than 25 years, he said, and I can honestly say he is one of the finest men I have ever had the privilege of knowing. When that flood came, a lot of us just tried to save ourselves, but Nathan went looking for people who needed help. He risked his life without a second thought, and because of that, he found the love of his life. There was applause and cheering, and Nathan ducked his head in embarrassment while Natalie squeezed his hand. But this is not just Nathan's story, Jack continued. It is Natalie's too. She came here from back east, lost and grieving, and she found her home. She found her strength. And together, they have built something beautiful. They have raised fine children, built a successful ranch, and shown all of us what real love looks like. More applause, and this time, Natalie felt tears on her cheeks. She looked around at all the faces gathered there, at the life they had built not just for themselves but with the help of this community. They had all come together after the flood to rebuild, and in the process, They had created something stronger than what had been there before. As the celebration continued into the evening, Nathan pulled Natalie away from the crowd, leading her toward the creek that ran through their property. It was the same creek they had fallen in love with 25 years ago, still clear and cold, still beautiful. "I have something for you," Nathan said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Natalie unwrapped it to find a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, there were 2 photographs inside, tiny but clear. One was of them on their wedding day, young and full of hope. The other was more recent, showing them surrounded by their children and grandchildren. "Past and present," Nathan said. "Everything we have been, everything we are." "It is perfect," Natalie whispered, tears spilling over. "Will you put it on me?" Nathan fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers gentle on her skin. Then he turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You remember what I promised you that day?" he asked. "In the flood." "You said you would not let go," Natalie replied. "And I have not," Nathan said. "Not for one single moment in 25 years. And I never will, Natalie. Not until my last breath, and maybe not even then. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." "I already know," Natalie said, pressing her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. "I have always known. From that very first day when you crashed through that door and pulled me out of the water, I knew you were someone special, someone I could trust with my life. And I will never betray that trust," Nathan vowed. They stood by the creek as the sun set, painting the sky in the colors they had watched together for a quarter century. The sounds of the party drifted down to them, laughter and music and joy. Their children and grandchildren were up there, the next generation of their love story. And somewhere beyond all of it, the mountains stood eternal, watching over the life they had built. Nathan and Natalie eventually grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces becoming lined with the years. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of partnership, by weathering storms both literal and metaphorical, by the quiet intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. When they were in their 60s, Apache Junction held a celebration for the 50th anniversary of the Great Flood. It was a bittersweet event, remembering those who had been lost, but also celebrating the resilience of those who had survived and rebuilt. Nathan and Natalie attended, now elder statesmen of the community, their story having taken on an almost legendary quality. Young couples would point to them and whisper, telling the story of how they met, how Nathan had carried Natalie through the flood, and how they had fallen in love. It had become the kind of romance that people aspired to, proof that even in the hardest times, love could not only survive but thrive. At the ceremony, the mayor asked Nathan to speak. He was reluctant at first, never comfortable being the center of attention, but Natalie encouraged him, and he could never refuse her anything. Nathan stood before the assembled crowd, looking out at faces young and old, at the town that had been destroyed and rebuilt, at the life he had helped create. He cleared his throat, gathering his thoughts. 50 years ago, this town faced one of its darkest days, he began. We lost people we loved. We lost homes and businesses and our sense of security. But we did not lose our community. We did not lose our determination to rebuild, to come back stronger than before. He paused, his eyes finding Natalie in the crowd. That day changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Not just because I helped some people, but because I found my purpose. I found my home. I found the woman I would love for the rest of my life. Natalie smiled at him, her eyes bright with tears. If I could go back and change that day, prevent the flood from happening, I would not, Nathan continued. Because that disaster brought me the greatest blessing of my life. It taught me that even in our worst moments there is hope, there is love. There is the possibility of something beautiful emerging from the rubble. He looked back out at the crowd. So today, we remember those we lost. We honor the sacrifice and struggle it took to rebuild, but we also celebrate. We celebrate our community, our resilience, and the love stories that came from that terrible day. Because that is what life is about, finding the beauty in the hardship, finding the love in the chaos, and holding on to it with everything you have got. The crowd erupted in applause, and Nathan stepped down from the platform, going straight to Natalie. She stood to meet him, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "That was beautiful," she murmured against his chest. "I meant every word," he said. They stayed at the celebration for a while longer, talking with friends old and new, reminiscing about the past and marveling at how the town had changed. But eventually they headed home, back to the ranch that was now run primarily by Thomas and his family, though Nathan still helped where he could. That evening they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Nathan's joints ached more than they used to, and Natalie's energy was not what it once was, but they were together, and that was what mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked suddenly. "Staying here. You could have gone back east, maybe found someone from your own background." Natalie looked at him in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" "I have just been thinking," Nathan said, "about everything you gave up to be with me, the life you could have had." "Nathan Prescott," Natalie said firmly, turning to face him, "I have never regretted a single moment with you. Not one. The life I could have had back east would have been a shadow of what we built here. You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, purpose, belonging. What more could I possibly want?" "I just wanted to make sure," Nathan said softly. "I never want you to feel like you settled." "I did not settle," Natalie said. I chose you, I chose this life, and it was the best decision I ever made." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You kept your promise, Nathan. You never let go, and I never wanted you to." Nathan raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you," he said. "More now than even on the day we married." "I love you too," Natalie replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars came out, surrounded by the life they had built, the legacy they would leave behind. 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, and more on the way. A successful ranch that would continue for generations. A love story that had become legendary in Apache Junction, inspiring others to believe in the power of devotion, sacrifice, and keeping one's promises. Nathan and Natalie lived well into their 70s, which was remarkable for the time and place. They died within months of each other, Nathan going first peacefully in his sleep, and Natalie following soon after, unable to imagine life without her partner of more than 50 years. They were buried side by side on their ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. Their children made sure the headstone bore not just their names and dates, but also an inscription that captured the essence of their love story. He promised not to let go, and he never did. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and eventually under his children after him. Grace's descendants spread throughout the territory, each generation hearing the story of their great-great-grandparents who fell in love during a flood. Emma's musical talent was passed down through her line, and there were always Prescott descendants who could be found bringing joy to the community with their songs. But more than the physical legacy, more than the land or the stories, Nathan and Natalie left behind something intangible but powerful. They left behind proof that love could conquer impossible circumstances, that a promise kept could change everything, That two people from completely different worlds could create something beautiful together. Years later, decades later, when Apache Junction celebrated its centennial, there was a special ceremony honoring the flood and the rebuilding that followed. Among the stories shared was that of Nathan and Natalie Prescott, the cowboy and the woman he carried through the rising flood, the promise he made and kept for a lifetime. Their great-great-grandchildren attended the ceremony, over a dozen of them now spread across Arizona and beyond. One of them, a young woman named Grace Natalie Prescott, who had been named after both her ancestors, stood up to speak. "I never met my great-great-grandparents," she said, "but I feel like I know them. Because their love story has been passed down through our family, a reminder of what is possible when two people commit to each other completely." She held up the silver locket that Natalie had worn every day after Nathan gave it to her on their 25th anniversary. It had been passed down through the family, a treasured heirloom. "My great-great-grandfather made a promise in the middle of a disaster," Grace Natalie continued. "He promised not to let go, and he kept that promise every single day for over 50 years. That is the legacy he left us. Not just the land or the stories, but the example of what it means to love someone completely, to stand by them no matter what comes." She looked out at the crowd, at the faces young and old listening to her words. In a world where everything changes, where nothing seems permanent, their love remained constant. And that is what I hope we all remember today. Not just the flood that nearly destroyed this town, but the love stories that emerged from it. The lives that were built on the foundation of promises kept. The crowd applauded, and as Grace Natalie sat down, she looked up at the sky, at the vast Arizona blue that her ancestors had loved so much. She liked to think they were still together somehow, somewhere, Nathan still holding Natalie close, still keeping his promise even beyond death, because some loves are like that. They transcend time and circumstance. They become part of the very fabric of a place, woven into its history and its future. They become stories that are told and retold, reminding each generation that real love exists, that promises can be kept, that even in the darkest moments there is hope. And in Apache Junction, Arizona, on quiet evenings when the sun sets in brilliant colors over the mountains, some people swear they can still feel it. The love of a cowboy and the woman he saved, the promise he made and kept, the life they built together. It is in the wind that rustles through the cottonwood trees, in the water that runs clear in the creek, in the very earth itself. Because love like that does not die. It transforms, it inspires, it endures. And the story of Nathan and Natalie Prescott, of a cowboy who carried a woman through a rising flood and promised not to let go, will be told as long as there are people in Apache Junction who believe in the power of love, the importance of promises, and the beauty that can emerge from even the worst disasters. Their love was not perfect. They had their struggles and their challenges like any couple, but it was real and it was lasting, and it was built on a foundation of trust, sacrifice, and absolute devotion. In a world that often feels uncertain and temporary, that kind of love is a beacon. It is a reminder that some things are worth holding on to with everything you have, that some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost, that some loves are worth fighting for through floods and droughts and all the challenges that life can throw at you. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy that Nathan and Natalie Prescott left behind. Not just the land or the children or the stories, but the proof that real, lasting, transformative love is possible. That two people can meet in the worst circumstances imaginable and create something beautiful. That a promise made in desperation can become a foundation for a lifetime of happiness. In the end, their story was simple. A cowboy carried a woman through a rising flood, holding her high and promising not to let go. And he kept that promise every single day for the rest of their lives, building with her a love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. A love that proved that even in the wildest, hardest places, even in the face of disaster and uncertainty, hope and love can not only survive but flourish. And that is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to, because that is the kind of love that changes everything, the kind of love that lasts forever.